It's January 13th, 2017, and it's a big day for Nintendo fans. 3 months earlier in October of 2016, Nintendo had announced their new console, the Nintendo Switch. Their previous console, the Wii U, was a commercial flop hated by most, so the fans were excited to learn about Nintendo's next console. But information on the console had been sparse for quite a while now, but that was all about to change on this January day. Nintendo was holding a live, in-person event to reveal all sorts of info on the system. The presentation was packed full of information like the console's price, release dates, features, and most importantly, its new games. The game announcements were stacked full of heavy hitters like a new 3D Mario game, Splatoon 2, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and of course, ARMS. ARMS is a brand new first-party fighting game from Nintendo. It was built around the unique mechanic of fighters having massive extendable arms that could stretch across the arena, and I was absolutely enamored with it. I grew up in the era of the Wii and Xbox 360. All the kids on my block had these home consoles, and we'd all go over to each other's houses frequently to play games together, but I never owned one of these systems. So when the Switch got announced, I went crazy for it. I would rewatch its first trailer hundreds of times and I would become dead set on getting one. Every rumor or piece of news I would be on top of. Then as my birthday drew closer in May of 2017, 2 months after the console's launch, I would incessantly beg my parents for the console, much to their annoyance. Then, my birthday came and went without the console. Little me was quite sad, but I understood that, hey, the Switch was sold out everywhere and I'm not entitled to anything. But then a few days after my birthday, my parents surprised me with one, and I was ecstatic, unboxing it on the spot and playing it into the wee hours of the night. Now, with the console in my hands, the hype I had for one of its games I'd been following began to grow exponentially, that being ARMS. The game looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was a fighting game with mechanics and concepts totally new to the genre. The game would host multiple public demos, all of which I would play to death. I remember during one of the demos, my parents were having some family friends over, and I'd run around like a little showing them my game on my Switch because I thought it was the coolest thing ever. But eventually, all the demos would be over, and I would patiently count the days until the game was finally released. The day it was released, I was so excited to play it that I didn't even wait to pick it up from the store like I normally would. I went straight to the eShop, making it the first game I ever bought digitally. ARMS would be the main game I played on my Switch for quite a while. I'd rack up dozens of hours on the game, engrossing myself in all the new updates, always playing the new characters and stages. Soon though, my time with the game would dry up as other Nintendo releases captured my interest. Now, nearly a decade later, ARMS is for all intents and purposes a dead franchise. Besides getting a character in Smash Bros, there's been nothing new out of the game for the past 5 years. But with the release of the Switch 2, many franchises are getting a refresh like Donkey Kong and Metroid. This led me to wondering if ARMS could get anything new like a sequel, which led me down the rabbit hole of what happened to ARMS. In my revisiting of this game, I discovered a string of unfortunate events by Nintendo that dug the hole for ARMS to lay in since day one. So allow me to take you through ARMS' development, history, and all of my reasons that I think Nintendo failed this game. Sometime during 2013 and 2014, the central idea for ARMS would come out of a conversation between two Nintendo developers, Kyosuke Ibuki and Shintaro Jikimaru. They would be discussing if you could make a fighting game with behind-the-back third-person perspective. But this idea immediately ran into some problems. Most fighting games use a side-on perspective because it makes it much easier to judge the distance between fighters. But in the game with the camera behind the back, telling how far an attack will go, or if an attack will even land becomes quite challenging. So the developer Kosuke Ibuki drew from his experience working on the Mario Kart series to create a prototype of the game. To quote Ibuki, something appears in the distance and you steer in relation to that. That is the basic structure of the game. He would apply the same principle to create the game's first version. Kosuke would come up with the idea of extendable fists that could reach across the arena. Throughout the development, this idea of extendable fists would go through many variations like using whips or machines to fight until the final concept of the fighters having extendable arms was settled upon. For the game's world, ideas were thrown out like using past Nintendo characters, but the developers felt like they clashed with the aesthetic of the new world they were building. Instead, a totally new cast of characters would be created for this extendable ARMS game. The world these characters would inhabit would be based on sports entertainment properties like WWE. This inspiration led to all the characters being participants in the ARMS League, the world's major sports league that revolves around people using their special ability of extendable arms to box each other. Each character would be inspired by coiled objects like ribbons, snakes, belts, hair, noodles, etc. This inspiration would become the characters' branding and theming in the league, with the fans wearing merch and styling themselves like their favorite fighter. For example, Springman has a jumpy and energetic personality. His hair is shaped like a giant spring, so his fans style their hair in the same way. His stage is surrounded by giant trampolines that you can jump off of. Each character is like this with very personalized looks, personalities, and arenas. But the League and characters aren't the only new parts of this world. The developers would create a totally new language for characters to speak and original companies that sponsor the League, similar to what Nintendo had done for another game that released a few years prior. When the development team learned of Nintendo's next console, the Switch, and its two detachable controllers, the Joy-Cons, the team saw them as a perfect way to incorporate motion controls into the game. This would cause the ARMS project to be shifted from a Wii U release to a Nintendo Switch release. Development on the game was finished around early to mid 2017, just in time for its global demos. ARMS hosted 3 free test punches that acted as the game's demos. These would be limited time events that let players test a smaller version of the game. The first one would last from May 26th to May 28th, 2017. The other 2 demos would be in early to June, just a few days before the game's release. Then finally, ARMS would be released on June 16th, 2017, 5 months after the Switch's release. The game received mostly positive reviews, getting an 8 from IGN, a 77 from Metacritic, and a 33 out of 40 from Famitsu. The game would sell just over 2 million copies a little over 1 year after its release. It was also nominated for Best Fighting Game at the 2017 Game Awards. It would lose to Injustice 2, but it's still impressive that it went toe-to-toe with other big fighting game franchises like Marvel vs. Capcom and Tekken. The game would receive 5 major content updates throughout 2017 and multiple small balancing updates. Each major game version would introduce a new character and a new map. Some of these versions would also add new features like a tournament mode and a pseudo-achievement system. The game's last content update would come on December 17, 2017. This would mark the last major update, followed only by a few small balancing patches. The final major piece of content would be when an ARMS character was added to the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It came as part of Smash's DLC Fighter Pass Volume 2. It was announced that there would be ARMS representation in Smash on June 22, 2020. Then a few days later, on the 29th, it was revealed that the character would be Min Min, as she was added to the game on that same day. And as of the time of recording, that is the last major thing to come out of the ARMS franchise. So with all the history out of the way, let's dive into what this game is actually about. I've talked about extendable arms and unique gameplay mechanics, but what is this game really about? Well, the core gameplay loop is pretty simple. Beat your opponent in a best 2 out of 3 boxing match. You have 3 attacks to help accomplish this: single punches, grabs, and rush attacks. Single punches are exactly what they sound like. You just throw one punch. These are the weakest of the 3 attacks, only doing a small amount of damage. Grabs are when you use both arms to grab your opponent and throw them across the arena. This deals more damage and leads your opponent being tossed into the ground. Lastly, rush attacks are a massive flurry of punches that do heavy amounts of damage to your opponents. To use a rush attack, you must wait until the meter by your health bar is full. You fill this meter up by landing hits and by using items in the arena. You can also perform a block which prevents you from being hit by a single punch or rush attack, but it still leaves you vulnerable to a grab. You were also able to customize your attacks with different type of gloves you wear. There are 42 different gloves that you can unlock, and you get them through the ARMS Getter game mode. Your goal is to punch down a firing range of sorts and aim to hit bosses which unlock new gloves for you. This mode can be fun, but after a while it gets tedious to unlock all the gloves for all of the characters. Now each glove also has a different ability. Some act as shields blocking punches, while others are like boomerangs that reach around the stage to hit your opponents. In addition to the ability each glove has, it can also have one of 7 different attributes. For example, when hit with a glove that has the ice attribute, you'll be temporarily frozen, or if you're hit with the electricity, both of your arms are temporarily disabled. Finally, you have some movement options. You can dash from side to side, jump, and move midair by dashing. There's also a small pool of items that can be dropped into your arena while fighting. The first 2 are bombs that you can hit towards your opponents. The first one deals big damage while the other one damages and stuns them. The other 2 are bottles that temporarily cause a portion of the arena to have a special effect. One of the bottles restores some of your HP and the other one fills your rush gauge as previously mentioned. All of these mechanics come together beautifully to create some really enjoyable combat. While the moveset your character has is pretty limited, the customization with your gloves and the movement options you have make the game feel expansive. You just feel like you have a considerable amount of options and choices to make, and all the moves you have just feel fluid and fun. When you land an attack that does a lot of damage, you really get the impression that you're taking down your opponent, and the movement just feels incredible. When you're jumping around the arena dodging punches, it makes you feel cool as hell. Speaking of the arenas, the maps in this game are really well put together. They strike a great balance between simple and unique. Each character has a stage that corresponds with them, with details that match their character. So for the movie star Twintel, her stage is the road outside of a Hollywood movie theater. It has luxury cars that act as obstacles, but can also be used as trampolines to jump around the stage. For another character, Helix, a living science experiment inspired by DNA, his stage is an old science lab with giant test tubes that act as cover. But these test tubes will be destroyed after taking too many hits, making the stage change dynamically throughout the fight. These maps' obstacles don't feel annoyingly obstructive, and the settings feel like they were ripped right out of the game's world. While simple in concept, the theming and execution of these stages make them feel incredibly fun to play, and this design philosophy is present throughout all of the stages, which lends each stage to feel different and fun to play. The main way you'll engage with the combat in these maps is through the Grand Prix mode, this game's story mode. But the story part is in really heavy quotes there because there isn't much of an actual narrative. It's just your character going through this tournament with very small moments of story at the end. The Grand Prix consists of 10 battles that act as the game's levels. 8 of those are the standard best out of 3 fights, and 2 of them are minigames. One minigame is a precision accuracy based game, and the others are based off the real life sports of basketball and volleyball. On the easier difficulties, when you reach the last battle of Grand Prix, you face Max Brass, the president of the Arms League and the greatest champion in the sport's history. He has the ability to deflect incoming single punches, and when below 20% health, he gains a boost in his strength. All the fighters have their own smaller abilities like this. Helix can stretch to avoid attacks, Ribbon Girl has a double jump, Lollipop's blocks are much stronger, etc, etc. In comparison, Max Brass's ability makes him much trickier to beat than other fighters, but it's not anything that's unmanageable. So after defeating him, you're crowned the ARMS champion and you get a nice little text blurb about what your character is doing after the tournament with a lovely art piece to accompany it. But if you're up for the challenge on the higher difficulties, this happens. Headlock is an experimental weapon that clamps onto Max Brass's head, revealing the game's secret final boss. Now having 6 arms and stronger attacks, this surprise boss is a big escalation in difficulty. In my attempts to beat it for this video, I had to retry this battle many times. Headlock's increased abilities and far stronger rush attack took me out way too many times to count. Thankfully, when you lose, it doesn't end your tournament run, it just resets you to right before your last fight, saving me what would have undoubtedly been way more hours of playing this game. But eventually, I took him out, and once again, I became the ARMS champion. But there's another final boss. On the game's highest difficulties, before you can even fight Max Brass, he's taken out by Dr. Coyle, the director of the ARMS laboratory. She's seeking to prove that she's the strongest fighter, and she does a damn good job of it. This is a really hard fight. Dr. Coyle has the ability to float around the stage and temporarily go invisible. While her invisibility lasts only a brief time, it can cause you to miss your punches, and the floating gives her way more evasive options. This makes her astronomically harder to deal with, and even worse to beat. It took me so many more attempts to beat her than it did Headlock, and I wasn't able to get a KO. I had to run down the in-game clock to beat her. But eventually, I would win my 2 rounds and become the ARMS champion one last time. Except there's one last final boss, because Headlock comes down, and that is the real final boss of the game. And holy shit, if the last bosses weren't difficult, this one is insane. With the extra abilities Dr. Coyle has, combined with the power of Headlock, this is a grueling fight. It took me multiple play sessions and days of attempts. I'm about to break my controller, dude. Holy shit. Every time, bro. Oh my god. Oh my god. I'm getting so pissed. I'm about to break my controller. Oh my god. Dude, off. I actually froze. No. Okay. Well. Dude, if I lose another fight, I'm gonna lose my mind. Holy bro. Oh, please. Please, bro. Anything. Oh! I went up around, oh my god. Oh my god, I went up around. Holy shit. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh god. Let's walk it. Let's go. Let's go. Flock it. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Yes! Oh my god, finally! Oh my god, finally! Oh my god, finally, dude. Oh, me, bro. Holy. Oh my god. Oh. Please say there's not more. But finally, for real this time, we were able to beat ARMS once and for all. Yes! Are you serious? Do I actually have to fight him? No, are you serious? Are you serious? Oh, thank god. While Grand Prix is the main game mode, there's a simple versus mode that lets you play an AI version of a fighter on any stage. But you aren't just limited to standard fights, you can also play the mini games that were previously mentioned. There's volleyball, where you literally just play one-on-one volleyball but with your arms. There's hoops, which is like basketball except you throw your opponent into the net to score. In skill shot, you try to hit more targets than your opponents in a limited time. Headlock scramble, as players fight as headlock against opponents. And lastly, in a 100-on-1, you take on swarms of enemies that get progressively harder. Your goal is to beat 100 of those enemies as fast as possible. All of these game modes are really good extensions of the ARMS concept. While none of them are better than the standard versus mode, they are fun to play occasionally, and they add lots of variety to a game that would have been quite stale without them. There are a lot of fun unlockables you can get throughout the game. There's an art gallery which expands upon the details of the world. Some of these art pieces are just nice little drawings of the characters, while others are documents of the world's history and the ARMS League. You can also view the art from the end of your Grand Prix run here. There's also a badge collection which acts as the game's achievement system, ranging from checking the game's news tab to playing in 900 matches. You can also use these badges as your in-game profile picture, which is a nice addition. But the biggest and most important unlockable are your aforementioned gloves. Lastly, ARMS is a phenomenal soundtrack. All the songs are super upbeat and sporty. They really get you into the fighting mood. Each stage has its own song that pairs with it. They're all remixes of the main theme with additions that suit the character. So for Ribbon Girls Arena, the music draws on pop influences with updated female vocals. Meanwhile, Min Min's theme draws upon East Asian influence for its sound. This goes a long way in giving the soundtrack a nice variety. I would say this is some very top shelf music out of Nintendo, and one of my personal favorite video game OSTs of all time. Revisiting ARMS for this video, it has held up incredibly well. The game is just as I remember it from my childhood, a fun, enjoyable, one-of-a-kind fighting game. But we must confront the sad reality that surrounds ARMS. Despite all of its positives that I've listed, this franchise is now stagnant. For a property that is nearly a decade old, there's been only one game and no new content for the majority of its life. So why? Why has ARMS been subjected to the tragic fate of being forgotten? ARMS not becoming a bigger deal is because of Nintendo's failed support for this fledgling IP. A myriad of bad decisions surrounding the game's marketing, updates, and release killed this game's chances of ever becoming something much bigger. And Nintendo's pitfalls with this game started well before ARMS released. So let's start with Nintendo's first failure in its marketing. During the release of the Switch, Nintendo was at a weird transitional point. They were coming off of the success of the Wii's family-friendly messaging and branding. Ads were depicting the Wii console as a fundamental part of family entertainment, and it worked. The Wii outsold all of its competitors during its generation. Looking to replicate the same success with their next console, the Wii U, Nintendo will double down on the family-friendly marketing. But this time it totally failed. Nintendo's ads felt out of touch and corny, and the Wii U suffered because of this, selling abysmally few consoles compared to its predecessor. So going into the 8th console generation with the Switch, Nintendo aimed for more sophisticated, or at least neutral ads that targeted the older, more hardcore gaming audience. But Nintendo wasn't really ready to commit to this yet. Being the family-friendly gaming brand, that was their winning model. Being family-friendly was what brought them success, so ARMS would have to pay the price for this. Instead of being marketed as a more serious fighter with a fleshed out combat system, it was marketed as a gimmicky kids game that centered around motion controls. This swiftly killed the chances of ARMS being taken seriously in the fighting game community. Players saw the game as a wacky kids franchise out of Nintendo instead of a serious fighting game that had the potential to be something big. But the players who did see the potential in this were let down by Nintendo, because support in the professional scene was lackluster at best. ARMS launched with next to no competitive support. In the game's entire lifetime, there were only 10 tournaments. Now that might sound like a lot, but for context, Nintendo hosts close to 30 Pokemon tournaments every year. So it was left to the grassroots communities to support the game's competitive scene. But an issue quickly arose because the game had two critical flaws that prevented this grassroots scene from taking off. As previously mentioned, to unlock new gloves, you have to play a somewhat tedious minigame to get them. So for an ARMS tournament to provide players with every possible option, the host would need to unlock all of the gloves for every character across dozens of consoles. This would take hours and hours upon end to complete, leading to the viability of tournaments being hosted by individuals very unsustainable. Not only that, there was no in-game support for a bracket-style tournament like in other fighting games. Eventually, a tournament mode would finally be added in version 5.1.0 on January 31st, 2018, which had a bracket-style tournament and would unlock all the gloves for all the characters, but it was too little too late. This update was one of the last major ones that the game received, so by the time it came out, all the hype that was there during the initial release had fizzled out, and the tournaments that Nintendo did host during this time were mostly online. Nintendo's lack of support killed this competitive scene before it even had the chance to start. On the topic of support, Nintendo did not keep this game relevant with updates. The game would only be supported by new content for 6 months. If the game continued to receive new characters and events longer into its lifetime, we may have seen more sales in a bigger community, but once again, Nintendo left the game before its true potential could be realized. In all the failures I've mentioned so far, Nintendo has given up on ARMS very shortly after its release. But why is that? Well, it comes down to the biggest factor that hurt this franchise the most: when it released. ARMS had an unfortunate release window that even more established IPs would struggle to dominate in. It was the third major release for Nintendo in the Switch era, and it was coming off of the coattails of two humongous releases, those being The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 3 months before, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe only 2 months before. The former is widely considered to be one of the greatest video games of all time and would become the blueprint for all open world games thereafter. And the latter is the 5th best-selling game of all time and is widely considered to be the best Mario Kart. In comparison, ARMS was just a weird new fighting game that had to stand toe-to-toe with these giants. When people bought a Switch, they weren't buying it for ARMS, they were getting it for Zelda and Mario Kart. And the most unfortunate part is, Nintendo knew this. They didn't release ARMS thinking it would generate a large install base, they used it as release padding. When looking at the release timeline for the early Switch era, ARMS is in the middle of a major content drought. Of course, the Switch launched with Zelda, and then a month later the new Mario Kart, but for a while those were the only big first-party releases out of Nintendo. There would be a 3-month gap in between Mario Kart and Nintendo's next big release, so ARMS is slotted in the middle to hold people over for what would come next. And what would be that next big game from Nintendo? Splatoon is the antithesis of what ARMS could have been. The two games follow an incredibly similar development and release history, as since one of them is on their 3rd installment with a spin-off on the way, and the other one is ARMS. So why are these two games so different? Because everywhere Nintendo failed with ARMS, they succeeded with Splatoon. Just like ARMS, Splatoon was a brand new IP entering a new genre for Nintendo. The devs would take on an established genre and form fresh mechanics for their game. They would also create a totally new world with original characters, language, brands, music, history, etc. But there would also be a few key differences that Nintendo made that would make all the difference. Starting with the time it was released, Splatoon was uncontested. The biggest release Splatoon had to compete with was Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, but that had come out half a year earlier and there were no other major releases in Splatoon's time. Smash 4 also wasn't a gigantic release like Zelda. Don't get me wrong, Smash Bros. Is a gaming legend, but Smash 4 isn't one of the best in the series' history. So Splatoon had lots of room to breathe with no competition. It was the central focus for the Nintendo world at that time. Next, Splatoon's marketing was... well, it wasn't great, but it was better than what ARMS got. Splatoon was also marketed as a silly kids game, but that's what was working for Nintendo during that time. While looking back, these commercials are atrocious. They did their job of stirring up discussion and generating interest. The ads were also very memeable, leading to the game being widely spread across the internet. All the ads for ARMS did was make people think it was a gimmicky motion control tech demo for the Switch. There was nothing for people to latch onto that would get them excited for ARMS. Third, Nintendo actually hosted tournaments for the game. There had been many in-person tournaments at events like E3 for years. To this day, Nintendo hosts a Splatoon World Championship every year. While not as big as other competitive gaming scenes, Nintendo nurtured their community and actually helped it grow, unlike with ARMS. Finally, Nintendo gave Splatoon years of updates. The game would receive around 2 years of updates with new weapons, maps, and events. The events Nintendo did for Splatoon were far more gripping. The game would have Splatfests, events where players choose a team pitting two distinct concepts like cats versus dogs against each other. Whichever team won more matches would have their team prevail. Meanwhile, the events for ARMS known as Party Crashers was only pit two fighters against each other. While still fun, it's far less gripping than the events for Splatoon. So, on July 21st, 2017, when the highly anticipated sequel Splatoon 2 released, it absolutely dominated. All the focus in the Nintendo community became centered on Splatoon. The game sold like hotcakes, selling 3.61 million copies in its first quarter on the market. To this day, it is estimated to have sold 14 million copies, meaning it has sold 600% better than ARMS. With everyone's focus on Splatoon 2, Nintendo didn't have an incentive to care about ARMS, leaving the game to be abandoned. Looking at ARMS post-mortem, it was a solid game that wasn't given the care it deserved. Nintendo gave this game poor timing and bad marketing, leading to a lack of sales. Its lack of a player base didn't give Nintendo much of a want to keep supporting the game. Then, when a far more successful competitive multiplayer game in the form of Splatoon 2 came out, there was no reason to keep supporting ARMS. And this is all just so unfortunate. Nintendo knew the winning formula for making a franchise, but they didn't capitalize on it. And this left me wondering, what could have been, and what could be? A different timeline where ARMS was successful and we got more games and more content. Is there any hope for this game to make a comeback in the future? Well, there might be. While doing my research for this video, I was looking at all the dates that the game's updates released on, and I noticed something weird. The game received a patch on June 3rd, 2025. This update added optimization for the Nintendo Switch 2, letting the game be played at a higher resolution with a bigger frame rate. This caught my attention because in 2025, who the hell cares about ARMS? Well, I do, but that's besides the point. Nintendo hasn't touched this game in years, but someone at Nintendo still has this game on their mind. And whoever it is, if it's an executive or small dev team, someone at Nintendo deemed it a worthy investment to spend time optimizing the game for the new console. With the release of the Switch 2, it's the perfect time for the game to make a comeback. A sequel or a large content update and renewed marketing campaign could draw interest back to the franchise. Plus, with Min Min being in Smash, ARMS is a more known game. While I personally don't think it's wise to market the game like this, you could develop a sequel with the mouse controls that the Switch 2 has, just like how the first game had motion controls. Unfortunately though, Nintendo has already released a game like this, Drag X Drive. It's a sports game about wheelchair basketball that's main marketing gimmick is the mouse controls that the Switch 2 has, so that idea for ARMS revival is out the window. But with Drag X Drive taking up what used to be ARMS' gimmick, this is the perfect time for ARMS to rebrand itself. Nintendo could capitalize on its newer, more powerful, more mature console to release an ARMS sequel focused on its complex gameplay mechanics. Nintendo also now has more years of hosting tournaments under its belt, so with more tournament support and this hypothetical sequel launching with a tournament mode added in the first game, the competitive scene would thrive. Nintendo's at the perfect time to release this new sequel. But while I can speculate for a hopeful future for this game, it's unfortunately clear that the demand that would drive a sequel isn't quite there. But that Switch update does give me hope that someone at Nintendo still cares. So maybe one day, that person, or that team's drive to continue the series will become great enough to produce a sequel. But until then, I'll wait and play other games to pass the time. And if ARMS 2 does ever come out, I'll be there to play it on day 1. And if 1-2 Switch of all games can get a sequel, then anything can happen. Thank you for watching.